Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. If you're watching this at 2 o'clock in the morning, you're definitely my people. Tonight, instead of our usual daily drama, we're diving deep into some serious historical drama. I swear, it's going to make you exclaim, "What the fuck? Is this for real?" Now, forget all those romantic television shows about the Tudor era. What I'm about to tell you is the bare, ugly truth about married life back then. I bet they never taught you this in any textbook. Just picture it. You're in the 16th century in England, where privacy was just a ridiculous concept, because the entire family slept in one room, and something called marital duty was a life-threatening minigame. Trust me, the crude wooden dildo was the least shocking gift. Because intimacy was controlled more tightly than the YouTube algorithm, the church only allowed one single position. Doctors believed your uterus was wandering around inside your body. And every single time you were intimate, there was a 50% chance you would die giving birth. We're going to explore 101 reasons proving that being a Tudor woman and having marital relations, that was a disastrous combo, the quickest way to sign your name on a death certificate. So, before you get your covers all cozy, do me a quick favor. Hit that like button and subscribe. I know you love this brutal truth. Oh, and as always, comment below and let me know where you're chilling from and what the exact time is where you are right now. Thanks for being a part of this crazy community. Time to turn off all the lights, put on Do Not Disturb, and let's jump down this historical rabbit hole together. Reason 1. Praying instead of birth control. Picture this. You're a Tudor woman, and your only protection from an unwanted pregnancy is a prayer. No pills, no condoms, not even a whisper of foams or rings, just hopeful hands clasped before you get down to business. The Catholic Church had declared all contraception a big no. No. So your plan B was begging the heavens every single time. Some brave souls tested folk remedies, honey, animal fat, crushed herbs, stuffed right up there in hopes of blocking that egg. Spoiler alert. It usually meant raging infections, oozing pus, and sometimes even yikes necrosis or death. Wealthier ladies tried herbal potions from their local wise woman, but these were often cocktail disasters, tree resin, rotten fruit, or animal urine. Suffice it to say, many ended up toxic, delirious, or worse. So each night, women lay in bed equal parts fear and faith, because if they avoided pregnancy, they'd worry about the next round. Madness, right? Reason 2. Childbirth a deadly gamble. Okay, now imagine actually getting pregnant. Congratulations? More like condolences. In Tudor times, half of all birthing mothers died in labour. Yes, a 50-50 roulette wheel with your life on the line. There were no painkillers, no antibiotics, and postnatal care meant don't die yet. Women drafted wills before heading into labour, kissed their older children goodbye, and prayed they'd see sunrise. The groans during contractions weren't just pain, they were the death dirge playing in the background. Then, when horror strikes hemorrhage, ruptured uterus, infection, you had a surgeon, who was often a carpenter or a barber with scissors. They'd hack and stitch with zero anesthesia and zero germ theory, leaving you to bleed out or recover with lifelong damage. Torn tissues, prolapsed organs, chronic infections. And guess what? Society expected you back washing dishes or birthing again fast because producing a male heir was job 1. Talk about a brutal cycle. Reason 3. Female anatomy, a burning secret. Tudor doctors thought women were upside-down men seriously. Their medical texts depicted female parts as alien monstrosities because they literally believed the vagina was just an inverted penis. So when an unlucky woman showed up with a laceration, say from a particularly enthusiastic encounter, the physician would grab horsehair for sutures and plunge right in. No numbing, no antiseptic, just pure medieval trial and terror. Mistakes? You bet. Bole punctures, arterial snag, instant infection. And during childbirth, they'd prod with herbs or light candles inside the womb. I'm not kidding. Hoping to encourage labour, which often meant ruptured membranes at the wrong time, massive bleeding, and uterine contamination. Zero ultrasounds, zero labs, just hope and pray. As you can imagine, the mortality rate post-surgery was off the charts. Reason 4. Sex ed from the barnyard. With no books or classes, young Tudors learned coitus by watching farm animals. Yes, Scratchy bleats and snorts in the barn were their anatomy lesson. Naturally, humans aren't pigs or sheep, so attempts to mimic Fido's mating dance ended in torn tissues, infections, and endless bewilderment. No lubrication, no instruction, just trial, error, and more error. The psychological fallout? Women grew terrified, men got clueless, and entire marriages began with awkward, traumatic experiences. And of course, none of this translated into better understanding. Instead, it fueled myths and more rumor-based advice. Reason 5. The church as bedroom bouncer. Finally, even behind closed doors, the Tudor bedroom was under ecclesiastical CCTV. In confession, priests demanded juicy details. How often, which position, even if you reached satisfaction. Only the so-called missionary pose was kosher. Any deviation was heresy. Slip up, and you faced public penance. Rocking a metal collar, confessing naked in the town square, or excommunication. Imagine trying to get cozy while worrying the father's going to report you to the congregation bulletin. The result? No spontaneity, just fear that every moan might end up as sermon fodder. Reason 6. Zero privacy. Imagine cramming your entire extended family, parents, grandparents, children, and servants into one single room, all sleeping on straw pallets inches apart. That's right, there was no private boudoir for the lovebirds. Your wedding night moment unfolded before a live audience of wide-eyed kids and hushed servants who might giggle or critique your technique. No pressure, right? This constant surveillance meant brides felt mortified and tense, unable to relax or explore their own bodies comfortably. Most couples just rushed through the deed quick, clumsy, and devoid of tenderness, because every creak or moan threatened gossip in the village square by morning. Reason 7. No hygiene standards. Bathing twice a year was considered luxurious, so personal cleanliness was practically mythical. Husbands and wives woke up sticky with sweat, smeared with soot, and probably harboring tiny armies of lice and fleas. Intimacy under these conditions translated to a full-blown germ fest. Think scabies, ringworm, and every other medieval plumbing nightmare. There was no antiseptic soap, no sanitizing hand wash, and certainly no freshen-up sprays. One tiny abrasion during a close encounter could trigger infections that festered for months. So much for romance, this was more like playing Russian roulette with your reproductive health. Reason 8. No pain relief. When Tudor folk said no pain, no gain, they weren't kidding. They believed suffering in childbirth, and sex proved piety, so anesthetics were non-existent. The only relief came from knocking back strong ale until you narrowly avoided passing out. For tears or wounds, untrained barbers or carpenter-turned-surgeon would stitch you up with horsehair. No numbing, no cleanliness, just pure agony. Women who cried out loudly were scolded for being weak. Many endured so much trauma that they developed lifelong PTSD without any form of psychological support. Talk about medieval torture under the guise of medicine. Reason 9. Female pleasure, a forbidden concept. In Tudor medical texts, a woman experiencing pleasure was treated like a demonic possession nicknamed nyamomania. Folks feared any hint of female orgasm might lead to witchcraft. Some communities even performed crude surgeries to remove dangerous tissue, ensuring women wouldn't enjoy themselves during conjugal relations. The bedroom was purely a baby-making workshop. There was no vocabulary for mutual delight. Women learned to dissociate emotion from their bodies to avoid scandal. Centuries later, you can still sense the echoes of that shame in hushed whispers about sexuality. Reason 10. Marriage as economic contract. Finally, love was utterly optional in Tudor. Unions' marriages were cold, hard business deals. The wedding night marked the completion of a livestock and land exchange. You might meet your spouse moments before being told to perform like a pro. Refusal meant financial penalties or being cast out. Sex was strictly contractual, a duty to produce heirs, preferably male. Over time, couples grew indifferent, viewing each other as assets rather than partners. Intimacy became a mechanical obligation, stripped of any warmth or affection. Reason 11. Syphilis, the lethal bedfellow. Imagine turning your cozy matrimonial nest into a roadside trap of the French disease. Syphilis, ominously dubbed the French pox, roamed 16th century England with zero mercy. The very first sign was a nasty sore on your most private parts then. Like clockwork, the infection spread, igniting fevers, bone aches, terrifying neurological breakdowns, and eventual madness. And here's the kicker. No one had penicillin. Instead, treatment involved slathering on or swallowing deadly mercury until your teeth fell out, hair turned brittle, and organs gave up the fight sometimes before the syphilis could finish you off. Newlyweds lived in perpetual terror that the honeymoon suite was a poisoned playground. Husbands might secretly acquire the pox from brothels, then pass it to their unsuspecting wives on the very first night. Worse still, visiting a Tudor infirmary was like brandishing a scarlet letter. Those known to have syphilis were shunned as moral pariahs. Women, fraught with fear of being branded, fallen, couldn't voice a peep, while men quietly sought clandestine cures, terrified of gossip. Syphilis wasn't just physical decline, it was social exile, spiritual damnation, and financial ruin all rolled into one. Reason 12. No concept of STDs, ignorance as cruelty. While everyone whispered about syphilis, they had no broader concept of sexually transmitted diseases. To the Tudors, genital infections sprang from bad humours, or divine retribution, not contagious microbes. So gonorrhea, chlamydia, and all their painful pals spread unchecked. Women unknowingly passed infections back and forth with husbands, and even to newborns, who arrived blind or deformed, their suffering chalked up to God's will. Oh, instead of medical interventions, villagers organized exorcisms or public penances. Sure, they were battling demons rather than bacteria. The result? A vicious loop of ignorance. Women couldn't protect themselves, doctors couldn't treat properly, and entire communities sank deeper into disease and despair. It's like playing hide and seek with an invisible enemy, except the only prize is heartbreak and sterile futures. Reason 13. Torture as treatment, medieval mayhem. Needles of hot metal to cauterize infected spots? Check. Live eels inserted in body cavities to draw out evil toxins? Check. Poultices made of animal dung, stagnant pond muck, and urine? Double check. Tudor practitioners from barbers to blacksmiths would perform these cures for anyone who could pay, transforming female anatomy into a battlefield. You'd lie there, mind racing, as they seared or stuffed your most intimate places without anesthesia. If you survived, you emerged weaker, scarred, and often still infected. Yet there was no alternative sit and wait for the pox to advance, or endure excruciating therapy. In that moment, every woman was both patient and guinea pig, powerless under the weight of purported medical wisdom. Reason 14. No anesthesia agony with every stitch. In the cruel theatre of Tudor surgery, be it a repair after a missigler's shapen delivery or a tear from rough intimacy, there was no ether, no chloroform, not even a drop of laudanum. Instead, you got a slug of strong ale or a handful of questionable herbs, and then snap, your limbs bound as horsehair sutured flesh. Imagine shrieking, convulsing, yet forced to endure every brutal stitch. For childbirth complications, hemorrhage or retained placenta, surgeons plunged in with unsterilized tools, their faith in prayer and chants guiding them. Blood spurted, intestines sometimes peaked, the patient's screams filled the hall. Many bled out on the table, but if they did survive, infection loomed like a lifelong shadow. Each procedure was a grim gamble: pain, poison, or premature death. Reason 15. The frog test amphibian anxiety. Finally, back to that frog. To confirm pregnancy, a Tudor healer injected a woman's urine into a frog. If the frog laid eggs within 24 hours, congratulations, you were expecting. It sounds almost charming, right? Wrong. That wait 24 hours of pacing, whispered prayers, and frog watching was psychological torture. You dared not eat or sleep properly, fearing the slightest shake of the amphibian might seal your fate. And once the results arrived, joy was tinged with dread. Was your body ready for another potentially fatal childbirth? Or were you cursed to endure more medical madness? The frog test encapsulated Tudor medicine's inhuman mix of curiosity, cruelty, and crude accuracy. Women were forced into wildlife experiments, their futures hinging on a creature with no concern for human misery. Reason 16. Completely misunderstood fertility cycles. Picture married couples in Tudor England, wide-eyed and hopeful, convinced that the moment a woman's monthly flow ends is the magic window for baby making. Spoiler alert, it's not. They had zero clue about ovulation peaking mid-cycle, so they dutifully planned their love life on the wrong dates, only to wind up childless and bewildered. And who did they blame? The wife, of course, smeared with whispers of infertility or whispered hints of witchcraft. Families would shun her, their trust evaporating faster than candlelight. In desperation, these couples turned to absurd folk remedies, drinking concoctions spiked with animal testicles, wearing strange amulets, even wrapping menstrual rags in spells and downing them like vile tonic. The result? Infections, poisoning, and sometimes death. Meanwhile, modern science has us charting cycles on apps and taking hormone tests, but Tudor brides were left spinning in superstition, gambling their health and reputation on rumours. Talk about betting the farm and then losing everything. Reason 17. Miscarriage as involuntary manslaughter. Imagine suffering a heartbreaking miscarriage and then being hauled before your neighbours as if you'd committed murder. Under Tudor law, spontaneous pregnancy loss was often seen as wanton killing. Women who miscarried, even accidentally, faced interrogations, imprisonment, and horrifyingly execution. The community believed that losing a fetus was a criminal act, so they locked up mothers, subjected them to beatings, and demanded confessions. Out of sheer terror, many women concealed pregnancies until the very last gasp, terrified that if nature's cruelty struck, they'd be accused of sinful intent. No medical support, no understanding that miscarriage happens naturally, only ruthless fear of legal wrath. The psychological toll? A double nightmare, grieving a lost child while fearing for one's own life. That's the Tudor twist on ghost stories, and absolutely no happy ending. Reason 18. Zero postpartum care, back to the grind. Fast forward past the baying midwives and you'd think, congratulations. But in Tudorland, congratulations meant, now get back to work. New mothers were shown the door just days after giving birth, expected to scrub floors, cook meals, care for older children, and, yes, resume marital duties immediately. No postpartum checkups, no gentle encouragement, just a matronly shove back into daily chores. Many women bled excessively, suffered infections, or even dripped blood into their linens for weeks. And families? They shrugged it off as God's will rather than a sign of medical neglect. With no helpful hands or community support, countless women collapsed in the weeks following childbirth, silent casualties of a society that viewed their suffering as routine. Next time you enjoy a leisurely maternity leave, whisper a thank you to those long-gone foremothers who never got one. Reason 19. Breech birth, a death sentence. Here's a scare-worthy scene. A woman in labour, the baby's bottom lodged first a breech presentation, and midwife or barber. Surgeon fumbling, twisting and turning the fetus by hand. No gentle guidance, no ultrasound, just raw muscle, desperate screams, and a high-stakes gamble. Most mothers bled out from torn uterus walls. Most infants suffocated or were crushed. No antiseptic, no anesthesia. Just the echo of agonized cries filling the chamber. Villagers who witnessed such grisly interventions never forgot those screams. It was like watching a slow-motion tragedy unfold in your own home. Without cesarean options or even basic sterile techniques, a breech baby spelled doom for both mother and child. Cue the ominous music, because Tudor childbirth was less miracle and more macabre. Reason 20. Twins' blessing or blood libel. You'd think twins would bring double joy, right? Not in Tudor times. Doubling up on babies conjured rumours of adultery or pacts with the devil. How could one man sire two at once? They'd whisper, casting the mother as a homegrown enchantress or promiscuous sinner. Families disowned her, neighbours spat curses, husbands demanded divorce or worse. Raise two infants alone in a suspicious village? Good luck. Many twin births ended with one or both babies taken away to legitimate households, or simply abandoned. The shock of seeing two newborns in the swaddling cloth was twisted into tales of witchcraft, and women paid the price in scandal, gossip, and exile. In that world, a twin's first cry could echo doom for the mother rather than delight. Reason 21. Menstruation, the monthly curse. Okay, picture this. Once a month, A woman's body bleeds, and in Tudor logic, that's evil humours, purging the soul, or worse, cursed Eve's legacy. Suddenly she's untouchable. No sharing meals, no church pews, and absolutely no snuggling with her husband. If she's lucky, she secludes herself in a horse stall or livestock shed, shivering in damp straw for days just so she won't pollute the rest of the household. Imagine the psychological gymnastics. Cramping agony, low-grade fever, shame draped over you like a second skin. Loved ones treat you like a wild creature, not a human being. There's no medical sympathy, only the echo of "stay away" bouncing off wooden beams. Every period cycle becomes a mini-exile, breeding stress, isolation, and total humiliation. And all she ever did was bleed a natural, monthly ritual turned into a societal scarlet letter. Reason 22. Pelvic organ, prolapse, despair, and degradation. After child, many Tudor mothers face a horrifying condition: organ prolapse, when uterus or bladder literally slips down or out. With no surgical fixes, they jam wooden wedges or stitched leather contraptions inside them. Think medieval popsicle sticks and leather belts to push organs back upward. Gross? You bet. Now, imagine trying to carry buckets of water, tend goats, rock infants, and still serve your husband, all while your insides are drooping. Chronic pain becomes your shadow, but the workload never stops. Laundry, sweeping, cooking. They whisper frail or unfit, perhaps blaming laziness rather than lack of medical care. Even seeing a healer costs more than a farmer's weekly wage. These women live in constant dread, afraid to cough, sneeze, or lift anything heavier than a loaf of bread. Reason 23. No concept of postpartum depression. Fast forward to the weeks after birth. Mood swings, overwhelming sadness, anxiety, maybe even despair. In our world, we'd call it postpartum depression. In Tudor times, demonic possession. A new mother showing any mental anguish, isolation, tearfulness, or worse, might be bound, beaten, or forced into exorcism rituals. No therapy, no rest, no kind words, just fasting or lashings to cast out the evil spirits. Think about that. You're healing from childbirth trauma, still bleeding, still tired, and now you're branded insane, shackled or tied to a prayer stake. Many women spiral into deeper mental illness or even suicide. With no medical language to describe emotional pain, these mothers suffer in absolute silence, stripped of dignity and empathy. Reason 24. Baptism of the dead, a gruesome baptismal nightmare. Here's one that'll haunt you. If a newborn dies, the church ironically insists on a post-mortem baptism to save the soul before burial. So imagine watching your tiny baby, already cold, have holy water splashed in its mouth, the sign of the cross carved on its brow over and over while you stand, helpless, heart in pieces. This last chance ritual drags on for hours, each sprinkle of water a knife twisting in a mother's heart. No room for private mourning, just an audience of clergy and neighbours, their prayers sounding like accusations. The physical chill of that holy water, the tears freezing on your cheeks, the body of your child beneath trembling hands. It's a psychological torment that few survivors ever truly recover from. Reason 25. Back to duty, no time to heal. Just when you think things couldn't get bleaker, meet the Tudor Postpartum Express. In a couple of days after birth or surgical stitching, new mothers are expected back in the fields, kitchens, and, of course, their husband's bed. Their stitches are still fresh, blood still leaking, and their insides screaming for rest, but society yanks them upright and slaps on the use it or lose it decree. Picture her, apron tied over blood-stained skirts, newborn strapped to her chest, cradling a spit-up baby with one hand and chopping vegetables with the other. There's no maternity leave, no sweet lullabies or gentle convalescence, just the unyielding rhythm of daily survival. You'd think self-care was some witch's trick, not a medical necessity. And if she collapses? Well, it's just how it goes, not a fatal system flaw. Reason 26. Public virginity inspection, stigma and torment. Okay, picture this. On the eve of her wedding, a young bride is laid out on a wooden bench, surrounded by stern older women, midwives, aunts, maybe even the groom's relatives. They peer, they prod, they await a single drop of blood on a handkerchief. If they see it, hooray! She's the pure maiden they paid for. No blood? Oops, rumours swirl that she's tainted, a traitor to her family. Engagement? Cancelled. Reputation? Torn to shreds. It's the ultimate body betrayal. Your most private moment turned into a public spectacle. Imagine the shame etching itself into your soul, the knowledge that one tiny slip an early period, a tear from childhood play could doom you. To survive, many girls secretly borrow a piece of cloth with a red stain or coach each other on how to protect that precious asset. So much for trust, intimacy or consent. Just the cold arithmetic of honor points scored or lost in front of the whole village. Reason 27. Women's adultery public execution sentence. Now, fast forward to the scandal aftermath. A whisper, a glance, a late-night stroll too close to the miller's son, and suddenly our heroine is accused of adultery. In Tudor law, a man's dalliances are shrugged off, but a woman's besmirch is a betrayal of crown and country. She's dragged to the town square, tied to a stake, and forced to confess under torture, thumbscrews, branding irons, whatever the local magistrate fancies. Once the confession is pried loose, real or forced flames leap high, or the noose tightens. The crowd hurls rotten produce, jeers, and spits. Her final moments become a gruesome warning to every other woman. And the irony? The real crime might have been her neighbour's envy or a spurned friend's gossip. No witness protections, no appeals, only the roar of a bloodthirsty public and the crackle of flames. Reason 28. Can't refuse your husband marital sexual violence. Here's where it gets even darker. Tudor law brands a wife's body as her husband's property, so consent simply doesn't exist. If she dares say no, she risks a savage beating, forfeiture of her dowry, or claims of witchcraft. There's no rape your wife statute, he's exercising his marital rights. Imagine bracing yourself night after night, heart pounding, waiting for that knock on the bedroom door. Refuse, and you're labelled rebellious or possessed. Speak out, and you face more humiliation or violence. With no sanctuary, no shelters, no legal advocates, she learns to stay silent, bury her dignity, and dissociate inside her own skin. And that, folks, is how everyday intimacy becomes a form of private torture. Reason 29. Out of wedlock pregnancy exile sentence. Now let's meet the unwed mother. She's expecting, unmarried, and the community votes. Exile her. Pack a few belongings. Head to the woods. Find shelter with strangers or huddle in a stable alongside livestock. No midwife for miles. No warm blankets. No comfort. She births alone. Her newborn's cries echoing off rough beams. And the child is often abandoned or perishes from cold and hunger. She's banned from church, blocked from her childhood home, and burdened with a stigma that lasts a lifetime. And here's the cruel twist. Many of these pregnancies stem from assault, yet she's the one cast out. The rapist walks free. She pays the price in isolation, deprivation, and unending disgrace. Reason 30. Marital rape, unrecognized property violation. Finally, let's face the grim reality. If a stranger forces himself on a woman, Tudor courts consider it a crime against her husband's property. Compensation goes to the husband, like broken pottery needing repair. The woman's body? Irrelevant. Her trauma? Invisible. Without physical proof, bruises, torn garments, her word is meaningless. And even then, the community hushes up, worried about scandal. The rapist might pay a fine, but the wife remains trapped, traumatized, ashamed, and abandoned by the very law that's supposed to protect her. In this twisted logic, her body is collateral, her suffering a mere footnote. Reason 31. Woman becomes legal nonentity, erased on paper. Picture the moment she says, "I do," and with that, poof, her legal identity vanishes. Under the law of coverture, a married woman's name, property, and rights are folded into her husband's like a piece of parchment sealed shut. No bank accounts in her name, no land deeds, no business contracts. She's, in effect, legally dead and entirely at her husband's mercy. Imagine you've mastered tailoring or bookkeeping, but when marriage hits, your hard-earned skills can't buy you independence. If he squanders her dowry or worse, turns violent, she can't sue, can't flee with children, can't own a roof over her head. She's a human asset bound forever by marital chains. It's like your nameplate is ripped off your door suddenly. You don't exist. Reason 32. Child marriage, legalized crime. Now fast forward to sweet 12, too young for life's big choices, yet in Tudor land she's already a lawful wife. 12-year-olds betrothed to full-grown men, expected to fulfill marital duties in a single night that feels more like a nightmare. Her body's barely stepping into childhood, and bam, forced adulthood and forced intimacy crash down hard. Childbirth rates among these young brides skyrocket mortality. Fragile bodies torn, blood loss, infection, broken dreams. The community just shrugs, calling it marital hazard. No shields or laws to protect. She's robbed of her education, her friends, her childhood. The games and giggles vanish, replaced by grim routines of cooking, sewing, and bearing heirs. An orchestrated tragedy disguised as tradition. Reason 33. No say in choosing a spouse, love is a sin. Let's talk matchmaking strictly arranged, strictly loveless. Parents and clan elders negotiate dowries, not desires. The maiden has zero bidding power. She might meet her husband-to-be for the first time behind a painted veil, but don't expect giggles or meet cute. It's a solemn transaction. Disagreements? Forget about divorce, it barely exists. She nods, she obeys, she becomes an emotional indentured servant. No vows of love, only legal obligations. Over time, her heart hardens into a stoic shell, mourning a love she never tasted. The walls around her feelings grow thick, and even decades later she wonders if love is just a myth told by bards. Reason 34. Infertility witchcraft verdict. Now, if she bears no sons, or horror, no children, alarm bells ring. Witch! The community whispers that she's made dark pacts or cast spells to thwart fertility. Banished from church gatherings, shunned at market stalls. She's branded a bringer of bad luck, a curse on her husband's lineage. Desperate, she may drink dubious potions, insert fetishes or rituals into her womb, only to suffer infections and heartbreak. All because biology and ignorance meet theology. No doctors to explain hormones, no sympathy, just fear-driven curses. She lives each day in the shadow of her womb's silence, a walking scapegoat for every failed harvest or sick calf. Reason 35. Even noble women lack privacy. Finally, let's move up from peasants to palaces. Spoiler. It's equally grim. Even in royal chambers, rites of bedding are conducted before a panel of matrons, esteemed noblewomen, and a bishop, as silent witnesses verify her chastity. The bride's crimson-stained linen becomes the royal seal of legitimacy, paraded like a trophy in great halls. Imagine every gasp, every soft moan, every flush of passion under the watchful eyes of aristocratic aunties. Romance? Out the window. Intimacy? Turned into a public ritual. When ceremony's done, that precious sheet is hoisted aloft, proof that the queen consort delivered on her marital contract. The drama's real, but emotions banned. Even gilded rooms can't escape the suffocating gaze of tradition. Reason 36. Sex positions dictated by the church. So imagine this. In Tudor England, the church didn't just police if married couples got busy, but how they got busy. The only approved move was the missionary face-down lockstep routine because apparently that made escape easiest for a baby. Anything else, cowgirl, spooning, or avant-garde yoga, was straight-up heresy. Picture newlyweds, candlelight flickering, but instead of stolen glances, they're anxiously counting heartbeats. Don't experiment, dear, or Father Reginald will send us both to confession. The result? Marital intimacy becomes a stiff, joyless drill. She's left with chafed skin and zero spark. He's frantically focused on avoiding sin rather than savoring connection. Too afraid to mix it up lest they be hauled before the parishioners, they resort to safe but sterile repetition, turning romance into a by-the-book bore. Reason 37. No concept of consent. Consent? What's that? In Tudor times, women were indoctrinated that saying no to their husbands was tantamount to treason. Feeling under the weather, running on fumes, or just plain exhausted? Tough luck that duty remained absolute. Decline, and you risked a beating, an accusation of cold-heartedness, or even banishment. Imagine her lying awake, body screaming for rest, while the husband holds the bedroom key, his power to demand her body at will. She internally whispers, "Please no." But outwardly she steels herself, grin plastered on face, shivering as she endures. Over time, this imbalance fractures trust, spurs paranoia, and can spiral into trauma. But who dares to speak up when the consequences of refusal are too frightening to even whisper about? Reason 38. Bulky clothing. A sexual barrier. Let's talk wardrobe. Picture 7 layers of stiff linen, a bone-crunching corset, and a farthingale skirt so wide you'd need doorways specially widened. On the wedding night, she's fumbling with a nest of fabrics by candlelight, each rustle a symphony of awkwardness. She asks for a hand cue, the loyal maidservant inserting a third party into an already fraught moment. Even in just shift and petticoat, the bulk still blocks everything. Think of friction against tight stays, the corset cutting off her breath, her cheeks dormant with nerves. What should be a tender removal of barriers becomes a lumbering battle with cloth. No wonder many couples gave up before even reaching the real action. Reason 39. No knowledge of lubrication. Lubricant? In Tudor land, even the idea of a slip and slide was taboo. Women's bodies were thought to just do it on their own. When dryness struck during her cycle or post-birth, there was no coconut oil, no olive oil, not even a dollop of spit deemed entirely safe. Instead, a savage setup. Rough entry, raw tissue, tears and blood. Pain was praised as piety if she felt nothing. She was called lazy or ungodly. So most just grimaced, clamped shut, and endured. Over time, scar tissue formed, each subsequent encounter scarier than the last. The fear locked down her desire, deepened her emotional retreat, and made marital duty feel like a one-way ticket to agony. Yikes. Reason 40. Frog pregnancy test, psychological torment. Finally, the pinnacle of early medical drama. Stick a frog. Yes, they'd inject a woman's urine into a frog's abdomen and wait a full day for it to lay eggs, pregnancy confirmed. It was more reliable than some herbal potions. But talk about suspense. She'd stand guard over the poor amphibian, eyes heavy with worry. Hop, little frog, show me the truth. For 24 excruciating hours, she'd nibble sparingly, afraid to risk a miscarriage and lose every moment's sleep. Then, at dawn, frog, egg nirvana, or stark disappointment. But good news or bad, that test triggered its own avalanche, planning for childbirth, or spiraling into fresh fears of conception. All thanks to one anxious animal. Reason 41. Public virginity inspection, stripped of basic rights. Picture this. On her wedding day, the bride is laid out on a hard wooden bench, surrounded by her new in-laws and a cadre of revered midwives. Under flickering candlelight, her hymen is examined for that telltale tear and drop of blood. If she passes, she's hailed as pure. If not, the ceremony can be called off or worse. She's branded for life as unworthy. This ritual robs her of bodily autonomy and dignity. Imagine the embarrassment, every gasp and grunt monitored by a semicircle of gawkers. And the echo of that trauma, it reverberates for decades, undermining her trust in marriage and even in her own body. In Tudor eyes, virginity was her only asset, and they held the only ledger. Reason 42. Male infidelity, unfair forgiveness. Now flip the script. A husband's affair? Often shrugged off as natural inclination. He might keep a mistress, frequent brothels, or even cohabit with a second wife, yet face minimal punishment beyond a fine or social scolding. Meanwhile, his wife, if she so much as looked twice at another man, could be burned, hanged, or publicly shamed until her spirit broke. This double standard crushed women under a weight of injustice. Their reputations lost in an instant, their families cast them out, while their unfaithful husbands strutted on. It's a stark lesson in Tudor misogyny. Male privilege triumphed over female rights, and justice was anything but blind. Reason 43. No knowledge of sexual health. Imagine growing up believing your body was a sealed mystery. Tudor education offered zero insight into reproductive organs, hormones, or pleasure. Sex was purely procreative, and any pain, dryness, or lack of desire was chalked up to melancholy or demonic influence. Women couldn't seek help for chronic discomfort like untreated infections or prolapse because no healer, midwife, or priest had the vocabulary or training to explain. And without understanding their own physiology, they bore each symptom in silence. Consequences ranged from untreated disease to lifelong psychological distress. Truly, ignorance was a prison without bars. Reason 44. Total ban on birth control. Every herb, amulet, and whispered recipe for contraception was condemned as witchcraft. Women suspected of preserving their fertility were accused of pacts with dark forces. There were no safe instructions for tracking cycles or timing intimacy. Just rumor, desperation, and harmful home remedies that often poisoned or traumatized. This absolute prohibition turned sensible family planning into a mortal gamble. Many a wife paid with her health, or even her life, for trying to avoid another perilous pregnancy. Under Tudor law and doctrine, rebellion against divine reproduction was unthinkable and utterly forbidden. Reason 45. Pregnancy according to the religious calendar. Here's the kicker. Sex was not only regulated by the church but scheduled around liturgical seasons. During Lent's 40 days of fasting, holy festivals and ember weeks, married couples were effectively on a bed ban. Only a handful of days each year were deemed permissible for conception, and timing intercourse became an intricate calendar puzzle. That meant many an unplanned pregnancy sprang from a slip, an overlooked feast day, or a miscounted season. Conversely, couples who waited might endure months of abstinence, frustration mounting as each forbidden day ticked by. Romance? It was replaced by rule books and church decrees dimming both spontaneity and joy. Reason 46. Masturbation, a capital crime. All right. Picture Tudor England as the ultimate prude party, where any form of sexual pleasure not aimed at producing an heir is considered filth before God. That includes self-pleasure, yes. Even a private moment of release was labelled a heinous crime against divine order. In some counties, the punishment was execution. You could be hanged or even burned at the stake for merely touching yourself. And why? Because clerics believed that any personal gratification beyond procreation defiled both body and soul. Imagine living with the constant dread that your own hand might betray you, or that an accidental slip into a private act becomes evidence for public hanging. People sometimes avoided being alone in bed at night simply to escape the risk of unintentional indiscretion. Tudor society obliterated personal sanctuary, replacing it with a regime of fear that stifled the most basic natural impulse. Reason 47. Forbidden to see your spouse's body. Faces in the dark. Next up, the church insisted that married couples consummate in utter darkness. No candles, no hearth fires, absolutely no peeking. Why? Because seeing flesh was thought to spark illicit desire and usher in moral chaos. Newlyweds groped their way through a pitch-black chamber, fumbling blind until the deed was done. Not only did this prevent any tender eye contact or mutual reassurance, but it also led to awkward misalignment, painful friction, and accidental bruising. And on top of that, imagine the psychological chill, a ritual of intimacy so devoid of light that partners felt more like strangers than lovers. The total darkness robbed them of emotional connection, turning what should be a moment of union into a nerve-wracking guessing game. Reason 48. No mattresses, only cold straw. Let's talk bedding. If you weren't nobility, your mattress was simply a pile of cheap straw on the cold earthen floor. That straw often harboured mould, rodents, lice, and who knows what else. So, couples clambered onto these damp beds of straw, knowing full well that every embrace risked sharing parasites and infection. The lack of cushion made any movement a klutzy affair. Rolling over meant stabbing discomfort, and shifting positions required a balancing act lest you sink into a lumpy abyss. Add the bone-chilling draft from the floor, and the honeymoon literally felt like cuddling with a bale of ice. Romance? Drifted away faster than steam over a cauldron. Reason 49. Sharing one blanket with the whole household. Now imagine entire families, grandparents, kids, servants crammed into a single drafty room, all huddling under one thin blanket. When a married couple tried to steal a private moment, kids often leaped up with childish shrieks, and servants tiptoed suspiciously close, peering for gossip-worthy sounds. There were no separate rooms, no locked doors, just a communal bedchamber that witnessed every creak and whisper. Privacy evaporated as innuendos ricocheted off stone walls and small feet padded about. Partners hurried through intimacy in mortified silence, fearing discovery at any squeak or groan. Under the constant gaze, or rather, overhearing of the household, true closeness simply vanished. Reason 50. Bathing a rare luxury, body odors aplenty. Finally, personal hygiene was considered almost unnecessary. Many folks bathed only twice a year to avoid harmful dampness. Imagine that. Layers of sweat, sweat-soaked garments, and rancid odors clinging to skin like a second layer. On those rare nights of intimacy, couples often held their breath mid-embrace, stifling coughs at the pungent bouquet. Women in particular endured unwashed genitalia for weeks, months, even years, breeding grounds for infections and chronic discomfort. Without soap or antiseptics, minor abrasions from intercourse festered, producing itching, burning, and oozing that only compounded the fear of an unclean body. Bodies were biological battlefields, and closeness felt like risking both emotional and physical contamination. Reason 51. Lice and fleas, your unwelcome bedfellows. So imagine this. You and your partner crawl under the covers only to discover a whole ecosystem of lice, fleas, and ticks itching for a bite. Tudor homes were rarely cleaned. Straw mattresses became cozy breeding grounds for parasites, and intimacy meant trading more than just tender touches. Every bump and rub could send those tiny critters scuttling across skin, leaving red welts that itched like wildfire. And here's the twist. Scratching those bites didn't help. In fact, many people scratched until they drew blood, creating perfect gateways for bacterial invaders that caused painful secondary infections. One minute you're leaning in for a kiss, and the next you're wrestling with an army of microscopic vampires. Talk about a mood killer. In that grim, itchy darkness, passion gave way to paranoia. No one could relax while their skin felt on fire. Reason 52. Total darkness, a dangerous game. All right, no electricity back then, and candles were luxury items. So newlyweds played hide and seek in pitch-black rooms, conserving every flicker of light. You guessed where your lover was by feel alone, risking accidental elbows, scratched backs, or worse, tiny bone fractures from a rogue misstep. Plus, there was the ever-looming fear of discovery. Servants tiptoeing outside the door, children wandering in midnight, or nosy neighbors pressing ears to thin walls. That stress, wondering who might witness your clandestine moment, zapped any spark or anticipation. Intimacy in utter blackness? More like a suspense thriller, where every rustle and creak could be an unwelcome audience member. Reason 53. Undressing impossible fabric fortresses. Visualize dozens of layers. Heavy petticoats, starched bodices, tight corsets, overskirts, and more. To undress meant a slow, noisy process in that feeble candlelight, each layer rustling like a riot of ghosts. It took upward of an hour just to expose that tiny gap for, well, you know. Often a maid helped, adding another pair of eyes to the scene, obliterating any semblance of intimacy. Even when finally down to underwear, a thick linen shift still obscured everything. And corsets, oh boy, they squeezed your torso so tightly that breathing deeply was a challenge, let alone moving in rhythm. What should have been a sweet, spontaneous evening became a clumsy, fabric-fueled fiasco, leaving couples more exasperated than enamored. Reason 54. Zero birth control knowledge. Tudor law banned any talk of contraception, books labelled heresy, herbs labelled witchcraft. So no one had a clue about safe days or the basics of fertility. Instead, women relied on whisperjure past rumours or medieval folk remedies that often caused poisoning or infection. This utter vacuum of knowledge trapped couples in a cycle of unwanted pregnancies and heartbreak. Imagine the anxiety. Every encounter could spell another child, another risk of dangerous childbirth, or worse, death. Without any real understanding of reproduction, these families were playing Russian roulette each night, heart-pounding, hoping this time might not be the last. Reason 55. Every encounter must produce an heir. And finally, in Tudorland, every bout of intimacy had a single, lofty goal: conception. If a couple didn't make a baby after a union, the wife faced ridicule, suspicion of sinfulness, or even divorce. Each missed month felt like failure, like they'd broken some divine contract. So there was no room for affection-first or emotion-led moments. Pleasure was a crime, Duty was the only script. Women dared not voice discomfort or request a break for rest, no matter how weak or ill. And men? They demanded compliance, viewing intimacy as a transactional necessity. Love, laughter, or even a gentle kiss must wait left outside that drafty bedroom door, locked away forever. Reason 56. No heating frozen foreplay. Picture a drafty cottage in a Tudor winter. No fireplace roaring, just a few smouldering embers and bone-chilling cold seeping through cracks. Couples peeled off layers of their bulky skirts and petticoats, only to have flesh meet air so frigid it felt like needles on skin. Blood vessels constricted, bodies shivered, and any gentle caress turned into an icy jolt. The only cure? A lightning-fast encounter. No lingering kisses, no playful teasing, just a hurried, mechanical, missionary dash to avoid frostbite. Foreplay, that precious bridge to emotional connection, was all but impossible when survival instincts screamed, "Get warm, get moving, get it over with." And so, what should have been an intimate journey became a fleeting sprint to warmth, leaving hearts wanting more than bodies dared. Reason 57. Baby-making factories. After the first honeymoon night, there was no rest for a Tudor bride. Society expected continuous pregnancies, ideally yielding a son to carry on the family name. Pause that cycle, and whispers of ungrateful or barren followed fast. Some husbands even threatened divorce or property confiscation if their wives didn't produce male heirs. These baby factories never closed for maintenance. No time to recover from one birth before shuffling into the next conception. Women's bodies, starved of nutrients and recuperation time, withered under unending pregnancies. Exhaustion, anemia, and malnutrition became their daily companions, shaving years and sometimes decades off their potential lifespan. Talk about an assembly line. Only, here every widget was a child, and the cost was a mother's health and well-being. Reason 58. Shame of menstruation. Every month, women faced an isolation chamber dubbed the menstrual hut, sometimes nothing more than a filthy stall or animal pen. Contact with food, water sources, even family members became taboo. They were branded unclean by both faith and folklore, forced to endure cramps, fatigue, and low-grade fevers alone. Imagine the heartbreak, body betraying you, society shunning you, and no one to whisper comfort. The psychological toll? Devastating. Long-lasting shame anchored deep in their minds, making a natural cycle feel like a personal failing. And instead of relief or medical care, they got silence and scorn month after isolating month. Reason 59. Postpartum blood loss silent killer. After childbirth, the body often refused to stop bleeding. Tudor midwives without oxygen, blood transfusions or antibiotics resorted to weak herbal concoctions or haphazard cauterization. Families, steeped in superstition, chalked these hemorrhages up to fate. "She's destined," they'd whisper, as mothers slipped toward anemia or unconsciousness. No doctor's visit, no hospital ward, just a shaking woman at home, her life dripping away on ragged linens. And when her vision dimmed, so did society's concern. Death was just the way it went. Never a sign of system failure. It's hard to imagine anything more horrifying. Surviving childbirth only to be undone by invisible blood loss that no one knew how to stop. Reason 60. Numbed by trauma fading desire. Surviving a brutal delivery, torn perineum stitched crudely, bones bruised, perhaps even a rudimentary surgery without anesthesia, left many women physically and emotionally scarred. Over time, this trauma hardened into numbness. What once stirred warmth became cold routine. Fear of repeating that agony on every intimate touch became so acute they'd withdraw, leaving marriages hollowed out. No counselors, no support groups, only silent suffering. Desire vanished, replaced by dread each time a spouse approached. And so, behind closed drab Tudor doors, many women lived cut off from pleasure, entirely trapped by memories of pain that turned longing into loathing. Reason 61. Poor nutritional regimen. So, imagine your dinner plate stacked with nothing but turnips, rye bread, and the occasional smoked hunk of meat that's more salt than sustenance. In Tudor times, diets were dreadfully lacking in iron, protein, and vitamins. Women, already doing the heavy lifting of childbirth and household chores, were running on empty, literally. Anemia set in fast, pale cheeks, pounding hearts, and dizzy spells that struck mid-chores. Every intimate moment or laborious delivery became a battle against a body begging for just one more bite of nourishment. Energy reserves were so depleted that even climbing a ladder or walking to the chapel felt Herculean. Can you picture the terror of going into labor while your legs might collapse beneath you? That was everyday life, no prenatal vitamins, just the same meager gruel day after day, draining strength and hope. Reason 62. Tooth loss aesthetic and health shame. Okay, switch gears. Now envision greeting your beloved with a smile full of gaping holes. Dental care? Non-existent. By their 20s or 30s, many Tudor women had lost multiple teeth from rotting decay. Not only did this make biting into even soft food a challenge, but awful breath became the unofficial perfume of the era. A surprise good morning lip lock could quickly turn into a horror show. The scent of rot wafting, your heart plummeting, wishing for nothing more than a mint or, modern dentistry. Intimacy suffered. How do you relax and enjoy closeness when every kiss feels like stepping into a dentist's hall of shame? Beauty standards may have been different back then, but self-esteem nosedived right alongside those missing molars. Reason 63. Serpent and centipede experiments folk. Medical horror. Let's plunge into the world of medieval quack cures. Beyond those infamous eel treatments, some practitioners shoved small snakes or centipedes into women's most sensitive places, convinced these critters would slurp up toxins. Yes, you heard that right. Slippery snakes sliding in. Legs of a centipede crawling on raw tissue, absolutely nightmare fuel. The result? Lacerated flesh, searing pain, raging infections, and trauma that haunted survivors for decades. Afterward, many women didn't just distrust folk medicine. They downright feared the very idea of seeking help, too terrified of what might be shoved inside next. It's like medical roulette with living bullets. Reason 64. Postpartum dryness relations as torture. Next stop. Postpartum reality. After enduring childbirth's horrors, tears, stitches, and blood, women were expected to leap straight into marital duties. But guess what? No lubrication, because Tudor science hadn't granted them that luxury. Their surgical wounds healed badly, natural fluids were scant, and every encounter became a cartilage-grinding ordeal. Tears and blood from old wounds mixed with raw friction, creating agony with a capital A. And here's the kicker. Refusing to endure this was grounds for scorn or worse. So many new mothers forced smiles through clenched teeth, mask-scoring their tears so husbands wouldn't think them uncooperative. This wasn't romance, it was sanctioned torment. Reason 65. Fistula, a lifelong wound. Finally, we land on one of the cruelest outcomes, obstetric fistula. When childbirth went awry, prolonged pressure could tear a hole between the vagina and bladder or rectum, causing uncontrollable leaks of urine or feces. Imagine the shame and isolation. A constant odor, damp clothes, and utter humiliation. With no surgical repair available, women lived in perpetual cleanup, ostracized by families who saw them as unclean. Social interaction? Almost impossible. They'd hide behind layers of skirts, avoid the hearth, and sleep in separate huts just to spare others the stench. Intimacy with a spouse? Out of the question, too mortifying and medically dangerous. A fistula wasn't just a wound, it was a sentence to solitude and heartbreak. Reason 66. No right to divorce marriage as indentured bondage. Alright, picture this. You're trapped in a marriage with zero exit ramp. That was Tudor England's reality. Divorce didn't exist for most women. Your vows were legally irreversible. Even if you endured physical or sexual abuse, you couldn't file for separation. Only a miracle loophole, say, proving your union was never valid, might convince the church court to grant a nullity, but that process was tortuously public and emotionally scarring. Imagine standing in a chilly cathedral, every secret aired before priests, family, and neighbors. Meanwhile, back home, you'd still be his wife, bound for life, forced to swallow humiliation like last week's stale bread. No escape plan, no safety rail, just a shuddering acceptance of endless pain. Reason 67. No sick leave illness as personal failing. Now, let's talk sick days, or the absence thereof. Tudor women? No concept of call in sick, ever. If you suffered from a venereal disease, pelvic organ prolapse, or postpartum complications, you still had to scrub floors, churn butter, and tuck in children. Taking a day off was synonymous with sloth, an unforgivable moral lapse. So what happened? Wounds festered, infections turned chronic, and some women literally worked themselves to death. Imagine stitching a tear in your own flesh at dawn, hauling water at noon, and baking bread by dusk, all while your guts ache and your vision blurs. It's not just harsh, it's heartbreakingly relentless. Reason 68. No age of consent child brides as official tragedy. Okay, this one's a doozy. Teenage girls 12-13 were deemed old enough for marriage and conjugal duty. That means those little hands you see in paintings? They could be clutching a husband's cloak by candlelight, terrified, unprepared. Their bodies weren't ready for childbirth, let alone wifely obligations. The result? Catastrophic injuries, agonizing trauma, and sometimes death. Yet society shrugged. That's just how it is. No protective laws, no questioning of parental authority, just children thrust prematurely into roles they couldn't possibly fill. Talk about a nightmare you can't unwatch. Reason 69. Zero sex education, clueless and vulnerable. Fast forward to your local school. There weren't any. No anatomy charts, no discussions on menstruation, no whisper of contraceptives or STDs. Instead, knowledge passed like a broken telephone, fragmented rumors mixed with superstition. Women didn't know how their bodies worked, why they bled monthly, or how diseases spread. So they relied on charlatans and folk medicine, often worsening their plight. Imagine stumbling through life with only half-baked tips from gossiping neighbors, clueless about how to protect yourself from injury or infection. It's like wandering in the dark without a flashlight or worse, a map. Reason 70. No emergency contraception morning after as myth. Finally, let's talk emergencies. Today, you pop a pill after a slip-up. Tudor women? Nothing. Not even a prayer worked reliably. There was no morning after formula, no post-coital remedy beyond dangerous potions that often backfired. If you feared an unwanted pregnancy, you were powerless. That single moment of fear in the night could echo for 9 months or a lifetime if complications arose. Every unplanned overlap of bodies risked a chain reaction. Shame, physical peril, social exile. And all because one crucial safety net was missing. Reason 71. No concept of safe sex. Imagine you and your partner, bare bones, with zero idea that protection could exist. That's Tudor life. No condoms, not even linen gloves or masks to reduce risk. The only safe sex they knew was limiting how many partners you saw, and that's it. No antiseptic washes, no midwives whispering, rinse here, rinse there. Intimacy was purely for procreation, so you could be passing infections back and forth like unwitting baton handoffs in a dark relay race. Every encounter risked gonorrhea, syphilis, or worse, no handbook, no warning labels, just hope and a prayer that you'd wake up the next morning still healthy. Creepy, right? Reason 72. No support services for sexual violence victims. Next up, if you were violated by a stranger, or even within marriage, there was literally nowhere to turn. No civil courts, no shelters, no rape crisis helplines. Imagine bearing that trauma alone, with only screaming walls for company. No compassionate confidants, no therapists to listen or doctors to treat invisible wounds. You'd swallow your agony like bad cider, fearful that speaking up might bring social disgrace rather than safety. It's as if the concept of compassion simply didn't exist, just a silent, suffocating hush that echoed through your bones each night. Reason 73. No protection for sexual disabilities. Let's talk chronic conditions: pelvic prolapse, fistula, congenital malformations. Women suffering these horrors faced cold shoulders and cruel whispers. There were no disability rights, no compassionate care programs, no reconstructive surgeries. You'd limp through daily life, weighed down by physical agony and crushing shame, as your community shunned you like a walking horror story. No midwife's gentle hand to guide you. No doctor's reassuring words, just isolation, pain, and the haunting fear that your body would never feel safe or whole again. Reason 74. No reconstructive medical techniques. Building on that, any trauma your reproductive organs endured, tears, infections, horrific injuries, remained permanent. No stitching with dissolvable sutures, no laser repairs, no delicate microsurgery. Instead, you lived with scars that throbbed every time you sat, walked, or... well, you get the idea. Pleasure and function vanished into the same void where light and hope should be. Daily life became a gauntlet of pain, each step reminding you of everything you lost and everything you'd been denied. It's a kind of cruelty that lingers in the mind long after the body scars. Reason 75. No concern for quality of sexual life. Finally, the cruelest punch. Sexual intimacy existed solely to make babies, nothing more. Talk of pleasure, emotional bonding, or mutual satisfaction. Taboo. Women weren't taught foreplay, self-care, or affectionate communication. They were trained like livestock, herded through the motions. Couples became two stoic figures, dutifully meeting marital obligations without laughter, without curiosity, without heart. Imagine leaning in for a hug but only feeling the glare of duty like a silent contract stamped on your body. Romance? Gone. Joy? Extinguished. Only a cold, transactional echo remained. Reason 76. Widows forced to remarry. Loss of choice. Picture this. You've just lost your husband, your partner, your rock, and instead of being allowed a moment to grieve, your family lines you up for another marriage contract, sometimes within weeks. No time to heal, no moment to catch your breath. You're handed over like a ledger entry to cement political alliances or shore up property deals. Suddenly, you're a transferable asset, stripped of autonomy, hurled into a bed with a stranger whose only qualification is his last name. Every whispered hope for personal closure drowns in fear. Will this new husband respect you, or treat you as nothing more than collateral? In Tudor land, widowhood was not rest. It was just a brief intermission before the next act kicked in. Reason 77. No ownership of one's body. Marriage as slavery. Under coverture, the moment you wed, your legal identity vanishes, poof. Your body, your possessions, your very person become your husband's domain. Need medical care? He consents or declines. Want to open a small stall or sign a lease? Not without his signature. Imagine your limbs registered like livestock, your rights folded into his estate papers. Any protest is laughed off after all. This is the law. So women existed under a legal straitjacket, owned in every sense, unable even to refuse a medical procedure, let alone choose a life path. It's like the ultimate subscription plan, one you never consented to. Reason 78. Regulated prostitution, not banned. Surprisingly, brothels in Tudor England weren't underground. They were licensed, taxed by local sheriffs. Prostitutes paid the piper, but had zero worker protections. No health checks, no legal recourse, no retirement fund. They lived in hovels, battled violence from clients, and faced rampant diseases, all while their industry was proudly declared essential revenue. Meanwhile, these women were simultaneously moral pariahs and taxable assets. It's a twisted paradox, publicly tolerated and economically exploited, yet socially despised. Imagine clocking in at dawn under the crown's ledger, your safety deemed less important than the king's coin. Reason 79. Sexual abuse of lower classes. Invisible and ignored. If you were a servant girl or a peasant, your body was a free-for-all to lords, magistrates, even farmers passing by, no consequences. Society deemed you worthless, your screams muffled by class prejudice. Reporting assault? Laughable. Courts sided with the powerful. Neighbors turned blind eyes. You bore the scars alone, trapped in a perpetual hush. In those bedchambers and barns, your body became a battleground where justice never set foot. This unspoken cruelty eroded trust, creating a silent epidemic of fear among the powerless. A horror story that no one would dare film. Reason 80. No right to separate matrimonial prison. Even separation was a luxury Tudor women rarely tasted. If your marriage turned violent or loveless, you couldn't simply move out. You stayed under one roof, sharing hearth and horror, unable to claim a room of your own. No safe houses, no sleeping apart. The law kept you tethered, forcing you to endure emotional exploitation and physical danger in equal measure. You slept in fear every night, the walls of your own home becoming iron bars. Escape? Not an option. In Tudor England, marriage meant perpetual companionship, like being trapped in a never-ending roommate nightmare, but the landlord was indifferent to your suffering. Reason 81. Public interrogation for divorce. Utter humiliation. So, imagine you finally find the courage to seek a divorce in Tudor England. Congratulations, you've won the lottery of shame. You're hauled into an ecclesiastical court, under the glare of monks, parishioners, and your nosiest neighbours. Here, you must publicly recount every painful detail, your spouse's cruelty, your marital incompatibility, even your failure at consummation. Each confession is a verbal scalpel, slicing into your dignity. The gallery gasps at every revelation, forging gossip that follows you home like a shadow. Once the gavel falls, you're branded forever the woman who spoke too loudly, the rebel wife, or worse. Even if the judge grants your freedom, the village never forgets. It's a theatrical trial, but you're both the accused and the star, trapped in a performance of pure, unfiltered mortification. And trust me, that's a show you never want tickets to. Reason 82. Children as economic assets. The fertility factory. On to our next unsettling gem. In Tudor society, children weren't cherished bundles of joy. They were economic cogs and future foot soldiers. The more you birthed, the richer your lineage, the stronger your harvest workforce. So guess what your duty was after your wedding night? Well, night after night turned into a marathon of childbearing. No rest, no personal choice, just baby after baby. Your body became a factory line, churning out heirs until you dropped. A missed pregnancy wasn't relief. It raised eyebrows about your piety and your husband's manhood. If you dared skip a brood, whispers of ungrateful or witchcraft followed you to the market. Over time, your ribs strayed from strain, your spirit sagged under relentless motherhood, and your lifespan shortened dramatically. Welcome to the fertility factory. Population. You. Reason 83. No support for rape victims. Lives shattered. Brace yourselves for a darker twist. Rape victims in Tudor times were utterly invisible. There was no sanctuary, no refuges, no therapists with comfy couches. You couldn't file a civil suit, as the law saw these attacks as private family matters. Doctors were few, priests might scold you for tempting fate, and charities were too busy feeding the local militia. So you stayed silent, your voice swallowed by fear and shame. No medical care, no counselling, no justice. Just the heavy cloak of trauma you carried alone. And every creak in your home, every passing glance, reminded you of that violation. Your world shrank to the walls of a prison, only you could feel a relentless cycle of isolation and dread. Reason 84. Infertility destroys status, branded useless. Next stop. Reach for the moon, but if you can't deliver a son, you're marked as worthless. Inheritance laws favoured male heirs, so infertile women, or those birthing only daughters, were scorned. They were accused of failing their natural calling, stripped of inheritance rights, and sometimes barred from church rolls or guild membership. Families whispered that infertility was a divine curse or even punishment for secret sins. A woman struggling to conceive watched her standing crumble, her social networks dissolve, and her marriage teeter on the brink of abandonment. And God forbid her husband blame witchcraft. She'd face suspicion, interrogation, and maybe worse. In Tudor society, your womb's performance was your reputation's sole guarantor. Reason 85. Forced wet nurses, mother and child torn apart. Finally, let's talk about forced wet nursing, an emotional tearjerker. Wealthy wives were often prohibited from nursing their own babies, with midwives or local peasant women stepping in as wet nurses. These mothers watched their newborns latch onto someone else in cramped, drafty nurseries. Imagine that first midnight cry, except you can't comfort your child, you can only listen from the next room. It was considered unseemly for gentlewomen to have leaky breasts ruining their gowns, so they employed strangers whose milk was purer, supposedly. But the real outcome? A cruel schism between mother and infant, an emotional wound that festered for years. Bonding was replaced by guilt and longing, as both mother and baby learned from day one that their love was negotiable. Reason 86. Public birth, uninvited audience. All right, imagine gearing up for the most intense performance of your life. Childbirth. But instead of a hushed room, you open your curtains to 30, 40 curious onlookers, midwives, neighbors, even that meddling cousin twice removed. It's like giving a solo concert with a stadium roaring, except your solo is more wild primal scream than sweet lullaby. Every grunt, every tear, every shaky breath is on display, and there's no off switch. You can't mute the crowd's whispers. Is she pushing yet? Oh, look at those veins! And you can't ask for privacy without sounding ungrateful. That narrowing doorway becomes a portal of judgment, not compassion. In Tudor times, your delivery room was the village's gossip generator. And you? You're the star of a show you never auditioned for. Reason 87. Stitching postpartum, tears without anesthetic. Okay, picture this. After months of pregnancy, your body finally welcomes new life. And then a midwife, or sometimes the local barber, surgeon drapes you across rough boards to sew up a torn perineum. But guess what's missing? Any pain relief whatsoever. No ether, no laudanum, not even a dram of ale. Instead, horsehair sutures bite into raw flesh while you scream in pure, echoing agony. Each knot tightened is like hammering a nail into your nerves. And afterward, no antibiotics, no antiseptic, just a ragged cloth to catch the blood. Infection, gangrene, lifelong trauma. These are the badges of honor in Tudor's approach to care. So next time you cringe at a paper cut, remember that centuries ago, mothers endured literal torture as routine medical procedure. Reason 88. Forced wet nurses, mother and child torn apart. Let's zoom in on the nursery drama. You give birth, you produce golden milk, yet you're forbidden from nursing your own baby. Instead, you're handed a list of approved wet nurses, often indentured servants, or local peasant women who suckle at your child's mouth while you watch from the next room. There's no discreet cuddling, no midnight bonding, no cooing lullabies from the woman who bore that baby. It's a one-way street. Your body, your milk, but somebody else's arms. Your milk is poured out in bowls or drained away, and you're left empty, helpless, wondering if the child you carried will ever know your voice or your scent. It's as if society carved out your maternal instinct and handed it to a stranger. Reason 89. Dying in the act. The silent cost. Here's one for the truly macabre. In an era of chronic malnutrition, back-to-back pregnancies, and no sanitary measures, many women literally collapse during intercourse. Picture the pressure to fulfill marital duty at any hour, even when your heart and blood vessels are on the brink. A sudden hemorrhage, a ruptured aneurysm, a stroke boom, you're gone, face down on the straw mattress, with your partner left to raise the alarm, if they choose to. There were no ambulances, no adrenaline shots, no emergency C-sections, just the hush that falls when life cuts off mid-whisper. And news of a woman dying in bed was often hushed up, chalked up to natural causes, while families quietly mourned between chores. Reason 90. Chronic sexual violence. No concept of healing. Finally, let's talk about the long-haul wounds. Women who survived rape or repeated marital coercion faced permanent scars, both flesh and psyche. But Tudor society had zero framework for recovery. No counselling, no safe houses, no restorative justice. You were told to confess your sins, and then sent back home to face the same abuser. Your trauma was shrugged off as a personal failing or demonic influence. Over time, that lingering dread turned into depression, haunting flashbacks, and an aversion so deep that intimacy felt impossible even when you desperately craved comfort. Without any outlet, these women lived in a perpetual state of fight or flight, their spirits starved of the simple remedy, compassion. Reason 91. Incurable venereal plagues. Okay, imagine the bedroom transformed into a battleground full of pain, ulcers and festering sores. In Tudor times, beyond syphilis, the dreaded French pox, there was gonorrhea, chlamydia, even neurosyphilis. No antibiotics to zap those germs, just mercury treatments, so toxic they'd strip your hair, teeth, and sanity. Victims endured relentless burning, bloody discharge, and agonizing nerve pain that spread through the body like wildfire. Nights became interminable as they watched their flesh betray them, all while society whispered that the only remedy was divine mercy. No clinics, no privacy, no hope. Their beds weren't sanctuaries of comfort, but cursed thrones of unending torment. Reason 92. Total absence of sexual education. Picture a world where the only how-to guide is the barnyard. Without books, lessons, or any real teachers, Tudor couples learned by watching animals in the stables. Yes, pigs and horses were their credentials. They had zero understanding of anatomy, reproduction, or infection control. No clue about syphilis, let alone bacteria or viruses. As a result, they stumbled in the dark, repeating the same painful mistakes, passing diseases around like unwelcome party favors. Women suffered in silence, never knowing they could protect themselves, or that their bodies were more than just breeding grounds. It's a cycle of ignorance breeding catastrophe, all because nobody bothered to open a book. Reason 93. Religious zealotry and physical torture. Now, imagine faith twisted into a tool of torture. Some extremist sects preached that sexual desire was sin incarnate. To atone, they whipped their own pelvic region with leather straps, starved themselves until they collapsed, or were forced into coarse linen tunics that scratched and chafed day and night. These rituals claimed to purify the soul, but often left women with permanent scars, infections, and shattered minds. The church, scarred by fear, endorsed these sadistic rites in the name of piety. You'd think, "Forgive us our trespasses," came with a massage, but nope, here it meant lash marks on your skin. Reason 94. No concept of age of consent child brides. Fast forward to a 12-year-old girl, shackled to a man twice her age. Yup, under Tudor law, 12 was ripe for marriage. Think of a child trudging through her wedding ceremony, expecting sweets and ribbons, only to find duty calls in a cramped bedchamber. Her body, still growing, was forced into labor it couldn't sustain, ripped tissues, catastrophic hemorrhages, shocked hearts. And on the psychological front? Childhood shattered into 1,000 desperate fragments. In their world, innocence was just a bargaining chip, and every little girl was a pawn for forging alliances. Reason 95. Untreated sexual dysfunctions. Finally, let's talk about the other silent sufferers. Couples struggling with impotence, painful intercourse, low libido, or premature ejaculation. In modern times, we have therapists, doctors, even apps. But back then, it was all sinful weakness or divine punishment. You can't perform, you lack faith. She feels no pleasure, she's cursed. No gentle guidance, no medical interventions, just useless charms, dubious potions and endless prayers. Partners drifted apart, suspicion grew, marriages frayed, and heartache settled in for the long haul. These intimate struggles never made the church sermons, but they tore couples' lives to shreds behind closed doors. Reason 96. Death, the final escape. Imagine lying awake in your straw-filled bed, aching from childbirth trauma and brutality, with no hope of relief. For too many Tudor women, death was the only door out of unending pain, whether from relentless pregnancies, brutal sexual abuse, or hemorrhaging after birth. Despite suicide being branded a heinous sin, some chose to swallow poison, slit their own wrists, or starve themselves into oblivion. It wasn't a cry for attention, it was a desperate bid for freedom from bodies betrayed by society. As dreadful as it sounds, for these women, the promise of endless rest outweighed another day in that merciless world. Reason 97. No maternity leave, back to the fields. Picture giving birth in the morning and ploughing muddy fields that very afternoon, because Tudor law demanded no sick days, no rest. Within 2 or 3 days of delivery, new mothers were expected to hoe, spin, churn, butter, or tend livestock, all while clutching their newborns. Those fresh stitches would split open, hemorrhaging would flare, and infections would set in. Yet, the yardstick of productivity was rigid. To miss a single day, and you were branded lazy. It's like a horror movie marathon on repeat, every postpartum wound, a ticking time bomb, every task a fresh ordeal. Reason 98. No health insurance, exorbitant medical costs. Now imagine paying for every poultice, every questionable herb, and having 0 coins in your pocket. Tudor women covered all their own medical bills, from crude midwife fees to the butchered attempts of barbers and bone setters. A handful of copper pennies might buy one dose of ointment. Without them, your wounds festered, your fever raged, and you simply endured. Many perished not only from disease, but from not having 2 or 3 coins to cover even basic cures. It was a cruel lottery. Wealth meant treatment, poverty meant a slow decline. Reason 99. No recognition for abuse victims, silent suffering. Imagine screaming behind closed doors and knowing absolutely no one will hear you. Under Tudor law, domestic or sexual violence was deemed a private matter. Church courts refused to intervene, and secular courts shrugged it off. Wives beaten or violated by husbands and relatives had no legal recourse. They couldn't report the crime, couldn't seek protection, and so they learned to silently weather bruise after bruise, trauma after trauma, hidden behind a placid facade. Their suffering was the ultimate invisible torment. Reason 100. Irresponsible fathers. Single mothers left to bear the burden. Picture carrying a baby by day and hauling firewood by night, with no father in sight. If a woman's pregnancy was out of wedlock or the result of assault, her child's father rarely provided support. Society spat on her for her shame, but offered no financial aid. She was left to beg, barter, or scavenge for food, clothing, and shelter, all while nursing her infant's cries. This crushing double burden, caring for a helpless newborn and fending for herself, drove many to despair and desperation. Reason 101. Short lifespans, the ultimate price. Finally, stitch it all together. Relentless childbirth, unchecked infections, brutal labor, starvation diets, and utter lack of care. The average Tudor woman's lifespan hovered around 35 to 40 years. Many never saw middle age, worn out by decades of childbearing, poisoning by toxic treatments, and chronic malnourishment. Their bodies were battlefields. Their lives fizzled out long before their time. And that, dear friends, brings us to the end of our Tudor journey, a world so harsh and unforgiving that today's comforts feel like pure magic. Thank you for staying with me through every whispered secret and shudder-worthy tale. If you found this late-night exploration both chilling and enlightening, please give the video a like, hit subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss another cozy dive into history's hidden corners. Now, as you snuggle under your blankets, let go of these shadows and imagine softer times. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and let sleep carry you away into gentle dreams. Good night, and sweet, sweet rest.